Foia. As mentioned before, I'm Daniel Schumann. I'm Policy Counsel with the Sunlight Foundation, and I am humbled by the folks who are on this panel with me because I think they know more about Foia on their little pinkies than I know in my entire career. So it is a pleasure to be moderating this discussion. I'm going to just briefly introduce the panelists, and then I'm going to ask them for opening statements, and then we're going to have a little conversation up here, and then of course there'll be the opportunity for questions. So on my right, on your left is Miriam Nesbitt, who is, gosh, I always think of you as the FOIA Ombudsman, but there's probably a more official title than that. Would you?
It is, but that's a good one. I'm the director of the Office of Government Information Services at the National Archives and Records Administration, but that's a long term, and because I get a lot of calls from vendors who want to sell the National Archives information technology products, you can guess that maybe FOIA Ombudsman works just fine. Thank you, Dan.
And of course, she is responsible in many ways for trying to make our entire freedom of information system work better, both from looking at its implementation to trying to facilitate conversations about particular requests and sort of ease them through the process. It is a largely thankless job, and I only say largely because thank you. Next up is Rick. I always know, is it Bloom or Blum? I always get it wrong.
For the record, it's Bloom.
It is Bloom.
But I've been called worse, so take your pick.
So, you know what? Let's do this a little different. I'm not going to introduce you guys. You introduce yourselves. Rick, please.
Yeah. I run something called it's the Sunshine in Government Initiative, and it's a coalition of 9 media associations. And one of the things that we're the most proud of is the existence of OGIS in Miriam's office. It is something that we've pushed hard to educate the public and Congress to create and build, and it's much needed. So that was one of the things we've done.
Excellent. Gavin?
Thanks, Daniel. I'm Gavin Baker. I'm an open government policy analyst at the Center for Effective Government, which was formerly known as OMB Watch.
So, and with that, I think what we'll do is we'll just move into just brief opening statements, and we're going to start with Miriam and work our way down. Then we'll go to Q&A, so please.
Thank you, Daniel. Good afternoon, everybody. I really enjoyed that introduction from Congressman Quigley, that it's always nice to hear from a representative who cares about and really is active in the area of open government and particularly supporting the Freedom of Information Act. The nice thing about working in FOIA, and this has been true almost since its beginning, is that it really is also a bipartisan effort. The Freedom of Information Act is something that everybody can get behind, and it's wonderful to see the interest by Representative Quigley and others. As Daniel said, my name is Miriam Nesbitt. I'm director of the Office of Government Information Services, and we are really a new kid on the block in the FOIA world. We were created by Congress in the amendments to the FOIA in 2007, the Open Government Act of 2007, really with a twofold mission. We, for the first time, are charged with bringing mediation services, dispute resolution into the FOIA process. And we do that by responding to requests for assistance for mediation services from members of the public and also from agencies. Many people, of course, think of us as a resource for requesters, but we really are a neutral party. We are there to help anyone in the process who is hitting a speed bump and could use some help in either preventing or resolving a dispute. So since our office opened in September 2009, we've handled around 2,000 requests for assistance About 1,200 of those are ones that we actually have to open a case, and really does require working with the customer, whether it's a requester or the agency, facilitating discussions. Sometimes these cases can take a very long time to resolve. Sometimes we're able to very quickly, really within a day, come up with a solution that works for everybody. And sometimes we're not able to satisfy everybody, and maybe that is not a bad thing. If the parties can go away agreeing that they're not going to continue to dispute, even if they're not really happy, maybe that's not a bad result. That's part of what we do. We also are charged with reviewing agency policies, procedures, and compliance with FOIA, and then making recommendations for ways to improve the process. You'll see that it's a little bit of a hybrid mission, in that we're, on the one hand, coming in as a neutral, establishing trust with our customers, facilitating conversation, opening up communications, and looking for solutions. And then, on the other hand, we're sort of coming in almost with an oversight function, looking at more systemic problems and sort of seeing how, whether or not there are problems, what's working well, what's working not. So you can see that we, our staff members wear two hats, and that can sometimes cause a little bit of tension in are we coming in one day with a checklist, or are we coming in the next day trying to mediate a dispute? It can be a little difficult to carry off. We are, I'm going to just mention some things that we're doing going forward, and then I want to toss it over to Rick and Gavin. We're always looking for areas that can use improvement. We feel like we do that every day. We have best practices that are out there, some of you are familiar with. We look for and comment regularly on agency proposed revisions to their FOIA regs, which are a very important part of the process. But going forward, we're probably going to be sort of focusing on a couple of big issues. One relates to really a persistent problem both for requesters and for agencies, and that is fees and also fee waivers. This can be a confusing area in application, and we think it would make a lot of sense to bring agency and requesters together to talk about and identify what are the problems, where there might be administrative, legislative, executive changes, or not. But in any event, sort of to air the issues and get that conversation going, and we think that could take a bit of time, but we're looking forward to doing that. The second area relates to improving and really making the process work better for people who are looking for immigration-related records of the U.S. government, because that really the main route of access for many people is through the Freedom of Information Act. Of course, the agencies that deal with immigration-related records, whether they deal with asylum or deportation or visas or whatever, get tens of thousands of requests a year, and I hope most of you sort of understand the context of this whole discussion is the executive branch gets somewhere in the neighborhood of 650,000 requests a year. That is a large number. So there's a lot of work going on. There are backlogs. I haven't even mentioned that. That's a persistent problem too, but there are a lot of people that are trying to work on that as well. But the focusing on the records related to immigration, we think is an area that We've already started talking to stakeholders and agencies, and we want to continue that conversation as well. So no recommendations on that score, but please look for those. The last thing I just want to add is we're making available this week. We're waiting for them to come off the press, but we do have our report on FY 2012. That'll be available online, I'm hoping. I'm looking at Kirsten Mitchell of our staff who really shepherded this through. Hopefully online, maybe by Thursday, she's telling me. But in any event, we'll also have printed copies this year, and we'll be distributing those to all of you. Tells a lot about our activities and how we do what we do and how we do the work we do. So I'm going to stop at that. Thank you.
Great. And the ability to talk about online access to the report in of itself is something that we'll touch on a little bit later on. But Rick, please.
Thank you, Daniel. I want to address a couple of priorities that the Sunshine in Government initiative has for FOIA reform. One is the statutory exemptions that Congress sees coming through committees and reviews. Another one is OGIS and the success that it's had and where we would like to see Congress help. And then this new project, FOIA Online, this Foia Portal, and address that because we think it has a lot of promise. So starting with Congress, we see, one of the things that we do on a daily basis is track legislation that mentions FOIA and that affects disclosure or the lack thereof. And we see too often in every corner of Congress and every committee exemptions proposed that will carve loopholes into FOIA. And they can be about space satellites, they can be about the Farm Bill, and they show up early in legislation, and they show up sometimes in the conference committee reports, and it's very hard late in the process to really take a close look about how FOIA would really affect the disclosure or withholding of the information in question. So what we've tried to do is find these things early and get involved and get engaged. And too often they are duplicative. Too often they cut broader holes than are necessary. And so we try to get very engaged early. The problem is they're very hard to track and find, and there's very little vetting with the FOIA committees. So we would love to see Congress, if you're sitting on a committee, if you see somebody come to you and raise FOIA as an issue, we need an exemption to protect this information. Otherwise, we can't share it, cybersecurity, whatever it is, that you go to the FOIA committees or that you go to Miriam and say, how would FOIA really affect this? And check it out and do some independent thought and analysis. We've got a lot more on our website about that. The other thing I want to touch on is OGIS itself. I think in the time that it's had, it's really ramped up and it's really taken on a lot of work to resolve every case that comes to it. We would love to see it have more independence so that the report it issues is also supplemented with, very crystallized recommendations on how Congress and the executive branch can improve FOIA. Where do we get the biggest bang for our buck? Right now, a lot of suggestions are in a lot of different places. They're doing everything they can to get the word out. But I think having some more independence there, it takes a long time to go through the interagency review process, to go through OMB. And I think we would get more timely, we would learn more from their expertise as they're going through cases by having more independence. And resources. They don't have that many staff. And so we'd love to see them, find some cost savings through FOIA Online and through this Foia Portal, perhaps, but figure out a way to really fully fund this. It's operating at about 1/3 to 1/5 of what CBO originally thought OGIS needed to get the job done. So given that lack of resources, I think it's pretty impressive what they've done. We would love to see them take on a stronger stand. Miriam knows what I'm going to say, I think, because she's heard it before.
I'm sitting in between.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We would love to see them create more of a record so that a requester can say, look, agency, we've seen this in the past. The past requester has seen this problem, seen this improper denial. Here's the opinion. You need to change course. And someone can say, okay, I understand that. We think that'd be effective. The last thing I want to mention is this Foia Portal. This is the digital way for agencies to process FOIA requests that lots of agencies can participate in, built by, in part, OGIS's leadership, by folks at EPA who built regulations.gov and the Department of Congress. A few more agencies have joined. I'm sure Miriam can talk about it. We would love to see this expanded, grown. You can take federal contracts on FOIA and save money and shift it into this FOIA online system, and build it once, and then all agencies can, take advantage of the solution that's built. We think it's very efficient and it's going to help a lot. I'm going to stop because I'm at 4.5 minutes.
Gavin?
Well, thanks, Daniel, and thanks to the Transparency Caucus for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here during Sunshine Week to talk about FOIA. FOIA is such a fundamental tool for open government because it provides the public with information about so many critical topics, everything from food safety, compliance with environmental standards, special interest influence in government decision-making, just across the board. But despite the reforms that Congress and the Obama administration have made recently, big backlogs of FOIA requests keep piling up, and agencies keep improperly withholding information. So we need a renewed effort to strengthen compliance and to modernize the FOIA system. And I want to highlight 4 key issues where I think new reforms can make a big difference in increasing transparency. So number 1, we have to increase compliance efforts and change the Justice Department's litigation stance. DOJ is supposed to make sure that agencies comply with FOIA, but instead they'll defend anything an agency does, even though their own memo says they shouldn't. So Congress should codify the standards in the Holder Memo, the presumption of openness that Mr. Quigley mentioned, and the foreseeable harm standard, and then hold DOJ accountable for following it. Congress has to say, your job is not to take FOIA cases to court, it's to keep FOIA cases out of court, so citizens can get what they're entitled to without having to make a federal case out of it, literally. This is the dispute resolution the dispute resolution idea that Miriam mentioned is along these same lines. The Open Government Act that the Senate is going to be looking at tomorrow introduced this idea of dispute resolution. I think that the Holder Memo was designed to build off of that and complement it, but it just has not been implemented. So number 2, we need to strengthen the Office of Government Information Services, Miriam's office. As Rick said, they've been doing a great job since the 2007 law created them with a limited budget and authority. So let's give them the tools they need to research what's working and what's not, to settle disputes, and to come up with solutions. Number 3, we should expand the proactive disclosure requirements under FOIA. Mr. Quigley also talked about this. Under the law, agencies have to make certain information available, not just on request, but proactively, and we need to move even more in that direction. This part of the law hasn't been updated since 1996, back when agency websites were an animated picture of a guy with a shovel. So Congress should codify the affirmative obligation to disclose that comes out of the Obama memo, as Mr. Quigley mentioned, and set minimum standards for agencies to disclose key information like who's meeting with their senior officials. Finally, number 4, we need to modernize the technology of the FOIA system. Every agency ought to have an automated tracking system for FOIA requests, and every agency ought to let you make and receive requests online. This is pretty basic in 2013, but the good news is that FOIA Online does this and more, as Rick and as Mr. Quigley have talked about. It already works thanks to the work that OGIS, the EPA, and the Commerce Department put into building it. It's convenient for requesters, but only a few agencies are using it so far. So we need to get the other agencies on FOIA Online and then keep developing it and making it better. So those are my 4 solutions for a faster, more effective FOIA: improve compliance, strengthen OGIS, expand proactive disclosure, and modernize the technology. I will mention that many, if not all, of these ideas are contained in the discussion draft that the Oversight Committee just released. I think this is a great opportunity for us. I feel like there's usually very broad agreement that there are problems in FOIA, It is less frequent that there is broad agreement on the ways that we ought to fix FOIA. I feel like we're coalescing around that now, and we should take advantage of that opportunity. I'll mention one other thing, which is that on the table in the back there are copies of our new report looking at transparency over the past 4 years, as well as our one-pager on how to increase proactive disclosure. So feel free to take copies of that. And in closing, I'd just like to say, please consider us a resource to your offices. We'd love to talk to you about these ideas or other transparency reforms. So thanks again to the caucus for the opportunity, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Gavin. I think I'd like to start. So we've heard conversation before with Representative Quigley and the panelists here in terms of the need to, in terms of resolving FOIA questions broadly to strengthen OGIS. And we've heard a little bit about the need for more funding. Actually, and I don't know if this is a question that you can address, and if not, it's my pleasure to put you on the spot. But of everyone here, you have the most familiarity with the strengths and challenges that are facing OGIS. What, in your opinion, needs to be done to help make it be more effective at the role that was laid out for it?
Well, let me go at it in a little bit backwards way. But before I do that, I'm just going to add my add to Gavin's, and I'm sure Rick's as well. For those of you here who have people coming to you for constituent services and they are concerned about and they're unhappy with what has happened with their making a FOIA request, we can help you with that too. So I want to be sure that when you leave here, you have our contact information, because that's something that we can help you with. We're there to help anybody who's having a problem. Okay, so advertisement over with. We are, as I mentioned before, really charged with two different missions. One is reviewing what agencies are doing and making recommendations for improvement, and the other is handling actual disputes. Ideally, we would have separate staff to do that, because we think that would probably be a more effective approach. There are models like that in the government, lots of models like that, and we think it might be, we really do think it would be a more effective way to handle those missions, so that you have the people who are doing the mediation and not necessarily then the next day, as I said, coming in and saying, well, let me check and see how you're performing, and sort of having a checklist. We're certainly not the FOIA police, but at the same time, we are charged with looking and seeing how agencies are doing and recommending changes to Congress and the President. So maybe that's sort of a backdoor way of responding to that. There are 7 of us. We have a great, dedicated, wonderful staff, and we try really hard to make sure that everybody gets attention who comes in the door. But we're challenged. But here's the other thing, and this ties very much into Gavin's remarks as well. The key really to reducing litigation and also improving customer service would be to really have dispute resolution as really embedded in the executive branch agencies as the way they work every day. They're responding to people, they're talking to people, they're having communications about the scope of their request, explaining the search, explaining what they're doing. That kind of communication could go a long way towards preventing disputes and preventing litigation. So we're going to keep working on that, and we think that is sort of long-term the way to go.
And often when you talk to people inside agencies who deal with FOIA issues, or just sort of generally speaking, people inside agencies, the incentive to make information publicly available is not all that great. When when compared to the trouble that they will get into for active disclosure. We see this again and again, where people who are doing their jobs find their careers run into a little bit of trouble when they do their jobs a little bit too well. And I think the second point that you had raised regarding embedding dispute resolution within the agencies is a piece of trying to get at that. Are there other things, and this is for the whole panel, are there other things that should be done to change the agency incentives so that they have a reason to disclose information to the public, as opposed to a very weak reason to disclose and a very strong reason to try to hold it back? And we can actually, maybe we'll start with Gavin and work this way across.
Sure. Well, the last revision to the FOIA, the Open Government Act, tried to address this issue in a couple of ways. One was, it said that if you're a requester and you have to take your case to court, and then suddenly, once there's a lawsuit, the agency changes their mind and decides to hand over the documents, then you can recover your attorney fees, even though it was technically settled out of court and no judge awarded attorney fees. I think that's very important. Miriam and I came from another event before this where there was a question from the audience about why FOIA litigation has increased, despite the fact that OGIS was created and the FOIA public liaisons were created to reduce FOIA litigation. And I suspect that the reason may be due to the change in the Open Government Act, so that as a requester, you now do not have to face such a potential expense. If you know that you're right and the agency is just dragging their feet and they're just going to cough it up once you finally take them to court, in the past, you would have to eat those costs, and now you will get them back. And that's also more, not only is it an incentive for requesters to enforce their rights, it is a disincentive for agencies to behave improperly. So I think that's very important. Another thing that the Open Government Act did is it said that agencies cannot charge fees if they exceed the statutory deadlines for responding to a request. Unfortunately, I don't think that that has had the kind of effect that people had hoped it would have. I suspect because fees are such a small percentage of agency FOIA costs, they really don't recoup their costs on FOIA.
It's less than 1%.
And so saying, well, you'll lose your fees if you don't hit your legal time limit is really not motivating agencies. So I wanted to point out the revisions that we made just a few years ago as a way of saying that, A, this is a question that people have been grappling with for a long time, how to set up the proper incentives for agencies to act appropriately, and B, to show that some of the things that have been done seem to be working somewhat well, and others are not. And so that might be a place for us to start in looking at where we go next.
Can I just add to what both of these folks have said? You know, in Texas, a government employee was sent to jail because they did not follow the disclosure requirements of their state open government records. The FOIA ombudsman, the equivalent in Texas, exists within the Attorney General's office. So that in and of itself creates a stronger incentive to follow the law. They have a separate open government division. At the federal level, how many people touch a FOIA request before the response goes back out? You can't hold the FOIA processor who's charged with leading the response, because you can't hold them accountable if the policy office in San Antonio or in California or in Region 13 of your agency is still sitting on reviewing a request. So that in and of itself creates a problem of holding people accountable for actually getting this stuff done. So one of the things that's so important is for us as a member of the public, for agencies, for Congress to be able to look at these logs to see, okay, this office is sitting on these requests for an average of 1.5 years. Why is that? When everybody else is taking about 10 days. then you get more accountability. It's more of a management tool. It's also just the ability for us to say, this needs to change right here, and let's get some improvement there. The other thing that the Open Government Act did in 2007 was it said, look, if you are going to have to recover attorney fees, if you are going to have to pay the requester because you made a bad decision, it's going to come out of your budget. This was a last-minute change, really, to get the bill done. It's going to come out of the agency's budget, not the central judgment fund that the federal government has. So the agencies are feeling it a little bit more. One problem I've heard anecdotally is that that's getting taken out of the FOIA processing set of money, but and that may be its own problem. But I think that there's a couple ways you can do it, but it's very hard.
Maybe that money should come out of the
PR budget?
Oh, I wasn't thinking, no, well, PR is good because there's actually some kind of vague communication coming out of that, but maybe from the agency head's office's budget. Or, less spending on drapes and more spending on open government.
I can get behind that, yeah.
Well, maybe it could come from the agency's security classification costs, which were $11 billion in the most recent year for which data is available, compared to the total FOIA processing costs, which are in the millions, but it is millions and not billions. So we spend $11 billion a year to keep secrets and less than $1 billion a year to release information.
See what happens? We come up here on a panel, and all of a sudden we become appropriators, and we're like, no, this money has to go over here.
This is a very powerful
It's a very powerful table.
Daniel,
Please.
if I could, the vast majority of Freedom of Information Act professionals at the executive branch agencies, and I say executive branch agencies because, of course, it's the executive branch that is subject to FOIA, are hardworking, they're dedicated, they really are trying to do their jobs and do it well. We have a really strong cadre now of people who work on these issues. They talk with each other. They're trying to ensure that they are up to the latest with law and policy and technology, and they would love to have more technology. That's a big problem too. But unless you have the leadership of agencies who are making it clear that open government is a good thing, and that in and of itself is the culture, and that is that there is a strong agency interest in disclosure and having openness be the byword. It is very difficult because there is no one gets rewarded for releasing too much information or lots of information. Sometimes these requests are complex, the records are voluminous, they have to be gathered from all over the country, in some cases all over the world if you're talking State Department or DOD. But nobody ever says, wow, Daniel, you did just such a great job of getting all those records out there. It's the person who releases a couple of lines too much that gets the focus.
So we need the opposite of the Rosemary Awards, is what you're saying.
How about both?
Or maybe a little bit of. So, we're talking about FOIA. Oh, yeah, I'm going to, yes. So I was, it's like you're reading my mind. Yeah, so I was going to say, questions. What we're going to do is I'm going to have folks come up here to this microphone so that we can actually catch you on the recording. Otherwise, the audio is in. Ali is going to get that all set up in just a moment. So I will do a little vamping while he does that. See, now we're all set. So if there are questions from the audience, please just come on up and we'll go through them in the order. And Mike, you have a question.
Me?
Yes, I know you do.
Okay, fine. I'll ask a question. Hi, I'm Mike Stern. So my question has to do with how far one has to get in order to have a dispute that can be resolved by your office, Miriam. Just to take myself as an example, I have a FOIA request that I put into Treasury about 2 years ago, and I got the letter saying it would take more than the standard amount of time, and since then I've written them at least one other letter, but I have no response at all. So is that something that can be resolved? Is it an appropriate point to come to your office, or does one have to do more than that?
The answer is yes. We would be happy to try and help you. But the first thing that we would say is, when was did anybody send you contact information so that you have somebody at the agency, at the Department of the Treasury to contact? Do you have an email? Do you have a phone number? Have you tried that? Because that's where we're going to start too.
Right.
But if you say, yeah, I've tried it, hadn't responded, or I got an answer and I didn't like the answer, then, we would help you. So
Okay, well, thank you.
let us know if
So
you,
far, all I've got is the FOIA officer that I communicated with, who wrote me a letter back, but I didn't get any
I would,
specific. And I left him
please
messages.
call him or her, email him or her, and say, can you give me a status update? I am still interested.
Okay, well, I'll
Okay.
try that again, and then I'm coming to your office.
Okay.
Thank you.
You might even
Okay.
mention, I've talked to the folks at OGIS, so I may go over to them. So if you can help me, maybe that'll,
Excellent.
And I'll jump in and say that as a requester, they can help with this. That when I've had difficulty getting someone to get back to me with an answer, and then I call over to OGIS and say, I haven't heard from them, can you check in with them? Within a week, all of a sudden I will start to hear some news. So they actually do, the folks on the other side do pick up the phone, and it can shake up the process when they get stuck sometimes.
Mostly.
All right, thank you very much.
See, this is a full-service panel. Not only do we share valuable information, but we help solve problems.
Absolutely.
Mike, I hope we don't hear from you because you get the answer that you're looking for, but if not, come on.
All right, thank you.
Not to jump in line, but I didn't see you guys lining up to ask a question. I'm just curious because the FOIA online portal seems like such a cool tool, and we'd like to do more to encourage/require agencies to participate. What do you see as the biggest hurdles to getting them? Is it just lack of leadership and effort, or are there logistical, funding, technological barriers, or both?
I'll take a shot at that since the National Archives and Records Administration is one of the partners. We have there are 6 departments and agencies that are participating right now. Not all parts of those departments and agencies are participating, but we feel like this is a really interesting and good start, and it's working. It's working for us, those of us who are participating. We launched October 1st as a multi-agency portal, and so far we think the results are really good and really interesting, and we are encouraging other agencies to participate. I heard a lot from agencies before October 1 that they really just were going to wait and see how it worked and see, was it successful? How were agencies, what was the experience? What was the user experience, both on the agency side and the requester side? And we would say, for 5 months, it's doing pretty good. And we're going to encourage other agencies to belong. But of course, it does involve change. For agencies that have been using another system or have a lot of money invested in those systems, they might not readily see how they could switch over, but our technology folks are very good at explaining, here's how you can start, here's how we can get you where you want to go eventually. So we have a lot of information. We do demos. If an agency is interested, all they need to do is contact us, and we will help them get all the information they need to figure out whether or not it's the right product for them.
I don't think funding's a barrier because there's a huge cost avoidance by having agencies finish up their contracts with the contractors who process FOIA requests and then move into FOIA Online. It's already been built. They spent about $1.3 million, as I understand it, to build it. It's costing about $600 to $700 to maintain it, but that's being paid. As I understand it, there's a sort of a fee for service. Agencies then pay into this service, and then the service gets customized to the needs of that agency. And then once the customization is built for one agency, it's ready for the next customer. It's a shared system. So you're building it once. And so that is a huge cost savings. And then on the processing side, if you don't do this electronically, it's taking, about 20 minutes. I heard an EPA estimate, 20 minutes to input a FOIA request into an electronic system. If you're using FOIA Online, someone comes in and fills out their form themselves. That happens automatically. An acknowledgement letter goes out automatically with the tracking number. So there's zero time for the agency to do this. The acknowledgement letter takes 10 minutes for every single request that comes in that's not through an online system. So you're saving 30 minutes for every single request. How many requests were there? 600,000, something like that?
650-some thousand last in FY12.
So that's about 300,000 hours. You can save a lot of people. You can bank a lot of those hours for FOIA. You can bank those hours for a lot of other things that the government needs things getting done. Huge cost savings, but it will take a little bit of time. We would love to see more agencies getting in line to get FOIA online so that they're beating their door down and start saving the money and start using the system. I frankly don't understand the resistance or the lack of moving more rapidly towards this system. Understandably, they have current contracts, can't break those, don't want to break those that'll be a huge mess. But as these contracts are ending, they ought to be moving into this.
Let me just is there a resource that one can provide to agencies, say, to show examples of how much money is being saved and time is being saved? Because it sounds like you've got all the numbers. Has this been pulled together?
Google is an amazing tool. And if you use Google and you put in FOIA Online PDF, you'll get some results that are, the show and tells that really include the cost savings. And it's impressive.
Well, I want to draw a distinction here because FOIA Online is kind of like a Swiss Army knife. There's a corkscrew, there is a nail file, it's got a whole bunch of stuff in there. And some of those things are more important than others to requesters. And some of those things, I think, may also be more mature or more clearly documented in terms of their benefits than others. So some of the things that I think ought to be happening right away, there ought to be one place where I as a requester can go to send a request to any agency. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Anywhere in the federal government. Right now, if I'm sending requests to 5 different agencies, I have to look up 5 different addresses just to figure out where to even send it. That doesn't make sense. That should all be done through one place. FOIA Online can do that today. Number 2, once I've sent a request to those agencies, they all send me a tracking number that I can use to keep track of where my request is and follow up with them when they don't respond to me after 2 years. Right now, all of those tracking numbers are different systems, and in most agencies, they're not automated. I have to call someone and leave a voicemail and wait for them to call me back just to tell me where my request is. If FedEx can track my package from Chicago to San Diego, then the Treasury Department ought to be able to tell me in a click, like, we're still processing it, or we've referred it to someone else, or it's in this stage of review. So FOIA Online can do that today. Every agency ought to do that. The third really critical feature, I would say, is that agencies right now don't have a way to share documents with each other. There was a GAO report last year where they looked at, even within the same cabinet department, that one component would have to literally physically carry documents from that component to the other component who they were referring the request to. That doesn't make any sense. That adds time, that adds the time that I have to wait as a requester to get a response. It adds expense for the government folks who have to do it. And we need to have a uniform way where agencies can share documents among themselves. FOIA Online can do that today. A lot of the other stuff that FOIA Online can do, it's, like I said, it's a pocket knife. It's got everything. And if it works, that's great. If agencies like the solutions that they have now for using them, I don't feel any compulsion to say you have to completely jump ship from, the system that you use to FOIA Online and do it tomorrow, if they actually are working better. But these core functions, we need to have agencies start moving to them now. And I think that it would be very helpful to have Congress increasingly set the tone and the expectation to agencies that the way you're doing it doesn't make sense, it's bad for requesters, it's not efficient, you're wasting money. We really want to see you move over, and if you don't find a way to do it pleasantly, then we're going to make it unpleasant for you, and we're going to forcibly flip the switch.
So I'm going to ask a concluding question, unless there are other questions from the audience. Okay. So the FOIA model, in many respects, is, I'm interested in this, can you give this to me? And we see it sort of morphing a little bit where with FOIA Online, where I've asked for it, now somebody else can see it as well, so you can actually share the information. So things that ideally are of common interest, instead of having people file multiple requests, you can just go and search on the website and find the answer to the question that you're looking for. And Gavin was talking a little bit about making more types of documents required to be proactively disclosed. So, FOIA is, the very, it's an older model of ask and receive. What does proactive disclosure look like? And I realize this is a big can of worms to open as people need to, as we get close to the end of our time here. But maybe just something to discuss a little bit. And I'd love to start with you. What does proactive disclosure with this context look like?
There was a time not that long ago when people would say, what do you mean by proactive disclosure? But now everybody talks about it, and it's become very much, people understand. They understand open data, they understand smart disclosure, they understand a lot of the initiatives, both in the government and non-government, for trying to make really, really open up any kind of data that are available to one person and letting people repurpose it and go from there. So, to my mind, what proactive disclosure is beginning to look like and could look like is really that having from the beginning, when information is collected, thinking about, if you're a government agency, thinking about from the beginning, what are we taking in, what are we creating that we could make available now, or set our markers for releasing it in 6 months or a year. And then also getting it out there in a way, which is part of the vision of FOIA Online, getting it out there so people know what's already been requested, who's made a request for what is available, and then beginning to do something that looks like crowdsourcing. So you begin to link the federal documents with the relevant state documents, with the relevant local documents, and beginning to really make them available in an incredibly useful way, so that it's not one document sitting on one agency's or a component of one agency's website buried down someplace, but it's really out there for people to find. Sorry, long answer, but
That's great.
It can happen.
Rick?
I guess I would only add that I think there's a couple different stages of proactive disclosure. You're describing the real sort of, if we start from the very organic sort of beginning point and how to build it into what government does. There's proactive disclosure when a FOIA request goes back out the door to the requester. That information should also be available to everybody else. That's a very immediate. Before that, look at all your FOIA requests as an agency. And what are you getting? If you're getting a lot of, auto emission certification requests for specific cars, put that database online and get it out of your FOIA queue. That's another kind of a responsive, proactive disclosure. And then there's that broader, when we're doing anything, what has to be available to make sure that, that our program's accountable for achieving the results that we're trying to achieve. How much money are we spending on this? What's the goal? And let's follow up. What are the metrics? What are the, qualitative metrics that we're going to use to evaluate success? And let's get all of that out online on that. So I would add that to what you're saying.
Gavin?
So I can say something old and something new. Something old is that proactive disclosure has always been part of FOIA. In fact, it was part of FOIA before FOIA was FOIA. Not to get too metaphysical here, but it was part of the Administrative Procedures Act before the original FOIA was passed. That the APA, and this is carried forward in the FOIA to this day, said there are certain things that you have to disclose, you have to make them available. There's no write down a request for exactly what you want it for, just put it in a room and anybody who wants it can walk in and look at it. So this is in the law now, and the question is just, was the law that was right in 1940 whatever when the APA was passed still the right law for 2013, which is still what year it is, right? Sunshine Week is a very long week in the transparency community.
You have no idea, Gavin.
You might suspect that my answer to that is no. It is not the right law for 2013, and we should expand it, that the categories in the law which get to, as Rick was suggesting, the core agency functioning and operations and decision-making, they don't capture what an agency does when it comes to its operations and activities and decision-making in 2013. And we also have so much greater capacity to make information available online rather than in some kind of a reading room in a stuffy government office building in Washington. So we should be taking advantages of those opportunities and modernizing the law. That's the something old. Something new is President Obama's FOIA memo, which, as Mr. Quigley mentioned, it said very simply, like, FOIA does not mean wait for a request. Agencies, you have an affirmative obligation to make information available to the public. You work for the public. This is a democracy. You have an obligation to try to make yourself understood and to try to explain to the public what you're doing. That ought to be in the law as well. It's a very simple idea. Enforcing it may be something else, but nevertheless, like writing it into the law and making clear that this is what Congress, as the first branch of government, expects of you, I think would be a very powerful gesture. And it was very powerful when the president said it, but it would be very powerful for Congress to say it and make it to law as well.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank Representative Quigley and Representative Issa for having all of us here today, speaking with you about FOIA. I'd also like to thank the panelists for helping educate me and helping all of us on these important FOIA issues. So join me in thanking them.
Thank you, Daniel.